All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Really excited to hear from folks. Um, Good afternoon or approaching good evening. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. My name is Jason Williamson. I am the Executive Director of the Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law here at NYU Law School. And it is my great privilege to be with you today as we celebrate the fifth anniversary of the Center and engage in what I expect to be an enlightening and energizing conversation about the fight for racial justice in this country, the obstacles we continue to face in achieving racial equity across all sectors of our society, and concrete strategies for advancing our efforts despite the daunting challenges before us. Now, I want to acknowledge, first of all, that this is an ambitious agenda for a 90-minute conversation. Um, and I don't expect that we're going to solve any of these problems tonight. But thankfully, we are blessed to be joined by a tremendous panel of racial justice advocates who have agreed to share their wisdom with us and help us to begin a new wave of engagement with these issues as the Center prepares to redouble its efforts to help transform, or in some instances, abolish, the systems and structures of white supremacy that continue to dominate this country. In the wake of the 2016 presidential election, as communities of color and other vulnerable populations began to contemplate the terrifying implications of a Donald Trump presidency and face perhaps the more terrifying fact that more than 60 million Americans knowingly voted him into office, many of us were searching for answers, or at the very least, a safe space in which to come together to support one another, to tell our stories, to share information and resources, and to strategize about how we move forward. And it was in that context, and in conjunction with the law school's strategic planning efforts around diversity and inclusion back in 2017, that our founder and faculty director emeritus, Professor Anthony Thompson, who many of you know and revere, launched the Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law. Over the course of the last 5 years, under the tremendous leadership of my predecessor and current co-faculty director, Vincent Sutherland, along with Professor Deborah Archer in her role as co-faculty director, the center has engaged in a range of important work to advance racial justice across the board, particularly with respect to housing, education, infrastructure development, criminal legal system reform, and the use of technology, broadly speaking, to exert social control over communities of color. Most of all, the center has served as a much-needed platform for activists, community members, students, lawyers, writers, researchers, and others who are invested in this work, and given them a chance to share their experiences, their work, and their aspirations for the future. Now, as we move into a post-Trump era of sorts, and are confronted with the ongoing and deep-seated anger, frustration, and resentment among many white Americans across the country, on full display during the January 6th attack on the US Capitol last year, by the way, it's time to take stock. Which of our strategies, messaging tactics, and advocacy efforts are working and which are not? Do we continue to try to transform or revolutionize these systems of inequality? Or do we seek to dismantle them entirely and replace them with new structures and new approaches? So it's in that spirit that we have invited this extraordinary set of panelists here with us today to help us drill down and unpack these important questions. Just so that everyone is on the same page, I'm gonna do a few brief introductions and then let the panelists weigh in themselves. I will take roughly an hour or so with some Q&A that I've developed here to get at some really specific issues. But then we'll open it up for any questions that folks in the audience may have and spend the last 15 or 20 minutes having the panelists respond to those questions. And if I could ask folks to, if you do have questions, to use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat, which is just a little bit easier for us to navigate. April Fraser Kamara serves as President and CEO of the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. April has been a champion for equal justice for 2 decades. A graduate of Howard Law School, she worked as a public defender in her hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and at the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia before joining the NLADA. April has been a part of the NLADA leadership for the past 5 years, most recently serving as Vice President for Strategic Alliances and Innovation, and prior to that as Chief of Lifelong Learning. She's also a co-founder of NLADA's newest section, the Black Public Defender Association, which aims to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in public defense and promote racial equity in criminal legal systems. As the 2020 chair of the American Bar Association's influential criminal justice section, she also led the adoption of an important ABA policy on race equity and prosecution, raising the age for juvenile prosecutions, reparations, abolition of private prisons, and other complex criminal legal issues. In addition to her JD from Howard University, April also holds a BA from Tennessee State University. Monifa Bandele has more than a decade of experience in policy analysis, communications, civic engagement, organizing, and project management, working with groups such as the Brennan Center for Justice, the People's Hurricane Relief Fund, and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. In her role as Chief Strategy Officer for MomsRising.org, Monifa manages the Health Kids and Maternal Justice Campaign, helping to successfully increase children's access to healthy food, stem junk food marketing, and end the school-to-prison pipeline. Through maternal justice, she is working to end the rising tide of maternal mortality in the United States. During her tenure at the Brennan Center as National Field Director for the Right to Vote campaign, the coalition successfully changed laws in 5 states, expanding the franchise to more than 250,000 formerly incarcerated people. Monifa also sits on the steering committee for Communities United for Police Reform here in New York, and is an activist with the Black Lives Matter movement and numerous other grassroots organizations dedicated to achieving racial justice. Previously, Monifa helped to launch 2 successful legal cases challenging police misconduct in New York City, conducted Know Your Rights workshops for thousands of community members, and worked to pass landmark police reform legislation in New York City back in 2013. And finally, Ryan P. Haygood is a longtime nationally respected civil rights attorney. As president and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Ryan leads a majority people of color staff of racial justice advocates whose cutting edge work, powered by grassroots organizing, research, writing, policy and legislative advocacy, and litigation, seeks to build reparative systems that create wealth, justice, and power in Black, Latinx, and other people of color, communities of color in New Jersey. Prior to leading the Institute, Ryan served as Deputy Director of Litigation at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where he worked for more than a decade. At LDF, Ryan litigated some of the most important civil rights cases of our time. In 2 of those cases, he defended a core provision of the Voting Rights Act, widely regarded as one of the nation's greatest pieces of civil rights legislation, before the United States Supreme Court. Ryan also led a successful challenge to Texas's racially discriminatory photo ID law, under which a voter could present a concealed handgun license as a form of identification to vote at the polls, but not a student ID. In the first ruling of its kind, a federal district court struck down Texas's photo ID law as intentionally racially discriminatory, a violation of the Voting Rights Act, and an unconstitutional poll tax. A passionate advocate, Ryan speaks and writes regularly on issues concerning race, law, social justice, democracy, and power. Ryan received his JD from the University of Colorado School of Law and BA in American History and Political Science, cum laude from Colorado College, where he was nominated for the Rhodes Scholarship and earned an academic and athletic All-American and Hall of Fame honors as a football player. So as you can see, we have quite the well-rounded group of folks joining us today. And I try to do my best to do justice to all the amazing work that you guys have done. But I want to turn it over to each of you to provide any additional information as far as introducing yourself, but also to talk about your organization's work in a little bit of detail, and talk to us about who you consider to be your constituents, who are the people that you work for, and to what extent is racial justice sort of part and parcel of the work that you do. So why don't we start the way that we sort of did the introduction. So we'll start with April, go to Monifa, and then to Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and congratulations on your anniversary. So I am currently the president and CEO of National Legal Aid and Defender Association, and we are 111 years old and have been working to advance access to justice issues in America for more than a century now. And who are our constituents? We work specifically on behalf of people who cannot afford to obtain counsel when facing legal systems, specifically carceral systems. So we represent public defenders. Our members are public defenders, civil legal aid attorneys, and the client community. So around the 1970s, I think it was amazing that one of the few national organizations who have a client council and specifically client leadership embedded in our structure. So beyond just the advocates who do the work, we also have a very strong voice of clients who are accessing legal services, either on the civil side or in the criminal system, who is also a part of our constituents. And as far as racial justice, it's been a core component of the work at NLADA for decades. And, you know, it's, of course, like many people, we are going through self-examination about what does it mean for public defenders, civil legal aid offices to be anti-racist organizations, how access to justice is a racial equity issue, because the overwhelming majority of people who do not have access to counsel are from communities of color. So it is just a part of who we are.
And April, before Monifa jumps in, could you say just a word also about the Black Public Defender Association and why you thought that that was an important addition to the work that the NLADA is doing?
Absolutely. So over 3 years ago, I served as a co-founder with Patrice James, who was a public defender in Oklahoma, who reached out to me while I was working at NLADA about whether or not it was a space for Black defenders who were doing work in carceral systems, whether or not we had a national community to talk about what it means to work within carceral systems and also be a part of those communities. And so we founded the Black Public Defender Association, which is a section of NLADA. So it's an independent group that is housed within NLADA that was created to advance the issues of to support, number one, Black people who work in carceral systems, but number two, to be a voice, because it oftentimes is a missing voice about what does it mean to do the work both professionally and to be personally impacted by these issues. And so I'm very proud of the work that BPDA has been able to do in a short period of time, and really talking about the important voice of Black defenders in the fight for liberation of Black communities.
Thanks, April. Monifa, and thank you especially to Monifa for being with us after all the hoops that she had to jump through to be here today. So Monifa, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on a panel with April and with Ryan. Again, my name is Monifa Bandele, and the formation I'll talk about today is the Movement for Black Lives. M4BL is an ecosystem of over 100 Black-led organizations from around the country. And it's a coalition that emerged out of the Ferguson uprisings after the killing of Mike Brown. And we have really brought together a diverse collective of organizations that work on policy, that are grassroots organizations, that are legal organizations, that are cultural organizations, all to really look at and to design how do we move towards a future rooted in abolition. And so in 2020, for the Juneteenth mobilizations, because we had had then 5 years of this movement for Black Lives infrastructure, we were able to launch a distributive mobilization that led to 25 million people in the streets, all 50 states, on the same weekend, demonstrating for racial justice, which is what we're talking about here today. Our constituents as an ecosystem are the members and the communities that those organizations are working in. Many people know the call that came out of the summer of 2020, which was for our local, state, and federal governments to invest in real community safety, looking at all the levers that we know as community organizers and as policy experts really make communities safe, and divest from carceral systems and things that we know a lot of times bring more harm than safety, act as harm reduction at best, a placebo, really don't have the long-term safe and healthy outcomes that we know our communities need. And so moving forward from that, we are really digging into local campaigns to move money out of policing and into public health, all the way up to a national initiative called the People's Response Act. But, our efforts are facing severe backlash that you touched on, some, Jason, in your introduction. As you see, the messaging and the language, whether it's critical race theory, defund the police, reparations, everything is being weaponized against us in this moment. But, I assert it is because it's a winning proposal. And I assert that it's because we are building power. And that's why everything from voting rights to the very language we're using is under attack in this moment. And so as a coalition, our constituents are the organizers in the communities that they work in. And I really believe that that's the core of how we build power towards racial justice.
Thanks for that, Monifa. And we're going to come back to a couple of the themes that you pointed to there. So I appreciate you kind of foreshadowing some of that. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Sure, Jason. So good to see you and Monifa in April and to celebrate your 5-year anniversary at the center. I put together a couple of slides I wanted to share, which speak about the Institute's work, which I'll share here. So the first one is, as a personal point of privilege, I am in my 20th year as a lawyer. And I have just been spending this past year reflecting on what these past 20 years have been like. And it's really gratifying to see Monifa on the screen. Monifa and I met when I was a junior lawyer at the Legal Defense Fund. To see you, Jason, leading the center. Jason, you and I worked together at LDF when you were an intern. And if you look at the top, I'm sharing this with permission, but if you look at the top of this document, this is the list of LDF summer interns in 2000. The first name you'll see at the top is one Deborah Archer, who I interned for. And if you look at this, the top of the list, you'll see NYU represented very well, including by Jake Sussman, who I saw his name on the line, and a professor named Melissa Murray, who works alongside you all at NYU. And for me, it's been an incredible arc in which I've learned a tremendous amount, including lessons learned very early from Monifa about, she would often say, you lawyers doing that work way up there, but that work way up there is not meaningful unless it's inspired by, guided by, informed by what people in communities are advocating for. Otherwise, you're fooling yourself about the impact you're having. Did I capture that right, Monifa? And so we've tried very hard here where I am at the Institute to make sure that our work is inspired by the communities that we serve. We are a racial justice legal advocacy organization. And we think a lot about the world in this way, right? That we all stand on this foundation that's cracked, and the cracks are of structural racism. And we've seen those cracks, particularly to Monifa's point, in the last year or more, turn into earthquakes in Black communities and other communities of color by design. And this is what those cracks look like in New Jersey. New Jersey is a state that people don't often appreciate is one of the states where slavery took root very, very deeply. It was called the slave state of the North. And that matters in today's life for Black folks because of the numbers you see here on this staircase. I think it's an apt analogy that all of us, right, face challenges in life represented by stairs. But for Black people in New Jersey, the stairs are especially steep. And so I want to lift up two quick numbers. You'll see there's a young Black boy standing at the bottom of the stairs. He's looking at this. This would be life, what lies ahead for Black people in the state. And the second step you'll see is $106,210 versus $179. That is the racial wealth gap in New Jersey, that the individual white adult on average has a net wealth of $106,000. But the individual net wealth for Black adults and brown adults is just 179 United States dollars. And if you go up a few more steps, you'll see that New Jersey has the highest Black to white youth incarceration disparity rate. That too is by design. I offered this tweet recently. It says that the net wealth for Black people in New Jersey is $179, less than the cost of a laptop. And that, I say at the bottom, is the way that New Jersey designed it in slavery. This is my wife. She's the principal of a school called Avon Avenue School in Newark South Ward. It's a district school. And she's surrounded in this picture by her team at Avon. And you'll see on the floor to the left of my wife, Charity, and right there in her team, there are what amount to 125 computers on the floor. This is right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when administrators here in Newark and across the country were being encouraged to make sure that their kids had devices to learn online at home. And you'll see the computers on the floor were a function of an incredible act of generosity that someone gave her $25,000 so that each kid could learn online at home. And this is a photo of two of her scholars. And if my wife were here telling the story, she'd say, yes, this picture speaks to a lot of things. And she lift up some of the more empowering aspects, that the young man on the left, Monifa, he has that kind of posture that suggests he might have a desk job, perhaps being a lawyer, very intently focusing on the work ahead. And his brother to the right has such beautiful posture that maybe he'll be a dancer, right? But she would also say that this picture speaks to the real reality that individual acts of heroism, someone gives a principal $25,000 to buy computers, that principal or team deliver those computers to their students at home in the middle of a pandemic. Those individual acts of heroism are not replacements for broken systems. And that if anything, this is a picture of what broken systems mean for our Black folks in New Jersey and our young Black folks in particular. In this picture, these boys create for themselves a desk at home and they move their computers to the windowsill because they're borrowing neighbors' Wi-Fi because they didn't have it then. And on the subject of broken systems, and as I close here, I know you all saw the recent video that went viral in a case involving two young boys fighting in the Bridgewater Mall here in New Jersey. It's incredibly disturbing, but I think truth-telling video about the way that New Jersey and its systems see Black people when they see us. And in the video, there are two boys fighting, one white boy who's a high school kid, a Black boy who's a middle school student. The Black boy is about 20 pounds lighter than the white boy. And at some point, the white boy has the Black boy on the ground on his back. And two police respond quickly, two white officers respond. They pull off the white boy who's on top of the Black boy. They sit him in the couch right there. You can see on the left side of the picture. And they both jump on the Black boy who again is on his back, flip him over onto his stomach, put knees in his back and handcuff him. And it's a video that's a whole lot of things. But one of the things it is it tells the truth about how both Black people and Black kids are seen in New Jersey and how the system treats Black kids. And I offered this tweet this morning in response to the video saying, let's be clear. This is who New Jersey is. Right? There are folks, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. No, stop with that. This is actually, by the numbers, by the inequality, who New Jersey is, where a Black kid is 18 times more likely to be in prison. This is the worst racial inequality in the country. It's also a state of more than 9 million people, which has just 11 white kids in prison. I'm not advocating, obviously, for the deeper incarceration of white kids, but there's a reason that number is so low, and we can unpack that more in the conversation. And finally, I say, and Governor Murphy's budget invests $445,504 annually to incarcerate mostly Black kids. And I encourage folks to think about that. What might we do in the life of a young person with nearly $500,000 to invest? And we're not thinking about youth incarceration. And I'll pause there. So good to be here.
Thanks, Ryan. Sobering, as usual. Appreciate you kind of framing that for us. And I think it's a good segue into my next question, which is that, and Monifa referenced this a bit as well. A lot of people have suggested that what we experienced in the summer of 2020 following the murder of George Floyd was some kind of reckoning or awakening of Americans, or some kind of consciousness around race. I'm not sure how much of that I buy into, but I certainly agree that something seemed different about the way that the country responded, and some of the conversations that started to happen during the course of that summer. So my question before we go any further is, one, do you believe that that was actually a moment of reckoning for this country that we should take seriously, and that created a moment of opportunity? And if it was, have we missed it? Has that moment passed us by? And are there? And I would note that since that moment, we've also had the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which may have dampened some of the optimism that folks may have felt after the uprisings of 2020. So I'm just curious how folks are thinking about the moment that we're in now and the one that we're sort of coming out of, and what that means for the way that we go about the work. So April, why don't I go back to you, and then we'll work our way back around.
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer, like language around a reckoning. What does that kind of assume happens? I think the appropriate term is to say it was a level raised of awareness. So what many Black folks we've always lived with and known forever, I feel like people cannot say they no longer know, or it's not clear. But for so long, I just think that that's a reality. I think it shined a spotlight on the issue. And the question about whether or not the moment has passed us, I'll actually refer to Jeffrey Robinson, who I think he summarized it well. I think when you look at American history, we have these moments where we have an opportunity. And he described it as a pushing a rock up a hill, right? And so there is a window of time to take advantage of certain events that happen in history. Now, if we pay attention to American history, it would tell us that the rock is going to slide backwards, because that is American history. If we look at Brown versus Board of Education, and then Brown 2, that came a few years later, if we look at all of the gains around civil rights, we have an American history that typically, whenever there is a sense of progress, there is also a sense of fear that is evoked in response to progress. So I actually agree with Monifa. I think what we're seeing is that I think people know that we, not only are we on the right side of history and we're winning, but the fearful response that we see should be very encouraging to those of us who have committed our lives to this fight, right? When people are fearful, I think it tells you something. And so in as much as we can learn from American history around how fear is typically evoked when people know in their gut that change is coming, I think is a sign of hope. But it's going to take all of us. Like, this is the crisis that we are currently living through. I don't think people, there's not enough acknowledgement of kind of where we are right now. And perhaps throughout history, when you're living through it, you can't give it words, right? But we are living through a period in history that I think when we look back 100 years from now, it will be a moment in history that will predict the future of America for generations to come. And I'm hopeful that we can win this fight.
Thanks, April. And Monifa, if you could say a little bit about this, because first of all, I appreciate you reminding us that there was a lot of work done in the years leading up to 2020 to create a situation in which people were in the streets, right? This wasn't just some spontaneous thing. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, how important it is for us to be prepared for those moments when they show up, and where you think we are right now as it relates to what happened in 2020 and all the things that have happened since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first I wanted to say to the first question, whether or not it was a passing, hot girl summer fad, or it was something that was a reckoning, is to look what happened right after. I want to shout out LaTosha Brown, who was also part of our crew back in the era that Ryan was talking about earlier, but 400 bills have been introduced to restrict voting rights, right? So you had the biggest mobilization in our lives, right, in the summer, and then you had the highest Black voter turnout, right, in generations. And so right back to back. So you have 400 bills introduced to restrict voting rights that came in 49 different states, put forth bills. And then 8 states passed anti-protest laws, right? Criminalizing what was, everybody's talking about their constitutional rights. That's the level of fear for what we are bringing in this moment. So we have to remember that as we raise those questions about if it's a passing fad, a lot of times that's really to gaslight us about the power that we've surmounted in this moment. And then the question that you asked about, what was the question again?
I just wanted to say a little bit more about all the prep work,
The preparation.
right? Yeah.
And I actually don't want to just point to the Ferguson uprisings. What the Ferguson uprisings did was there was a call to mobilize to one city. And from that, organizations built out and networked with each other and eventually became this ecosystem called the Movement for Black Lives. And so by 2020, we were able to seize the moment. Like you said, people were in the streets every day around the killing of George Floyd to say that Juneteenth is going to be a weekend of national reckoning. And we're going to do distributed marches all over the country. And we're networked now because coming out of Ferguson, which wasn't easy to network. There were a lot of divisions, there's different personalities, there's regional things. People come from different movement histories themselves. But just to hold that container together was really important and very powerful. But I actually want to point to the fact that all of these movements connect back. I was just in conversation recently with Ilyasha Shabazz, who's the daughter of Malcolm X. And she says, people forget that my grandparents were Garveyites. And then people forget that my great-grandparents in the Caribbean were a part of the resistance movement. So that's just like a family, but we should think of our movement that way. We're touched by all of those activists in the 60s and 70s who built on what was happening in the 50s, who are connected to the Garvey movement. So I also don't want to create this thing of that not only didn't it just pop up in 2020, it also wasn't born in 2015. That same summer, Eric Garner, right before that, Trayvon Martin, these organizations were doing work going back to Amadou Diallo, which is, I think, around the time I met Ryan, and we kind of connected this issue of voting rights and police reform and all the work that we were doing. So we've been building, our parents been building, our grandparents been building. So there's a continuum, but the struggle is to hold that container because it's always under attack. And to understand the roles that the different kinds of tactics play in that container, which I think is the upcoming question about litigation. And those were some of the struggles that we had 2 decades ago, and those conversations are still happening now.
Fantastic. Ryan, you want to jump in here? I both on this question of whether that was a real moment, and if it was, how did we do it justice by taking advantage of the opportunity, and are there more opportunities to come? And if you want to touch on any of the things that either Monica or April mentioned as well.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, I love the question. I really liked April's response about how we have these moments. So I'm 46. I was thinking about, for me, one of those earlier moments was Rodney King. I'm from the West, so there was the Rodney King brutality and then the response, right? The corresponding resistance. And it's something to behold, to be having the same conversation 30 years later, another moment, and more resistance. And I think to Monifa's point, at 46, I've thought a lot about the fear, right? Public Enemy, somebody who, pioneering rap group, Fear of a Black Planet, changed my life at that time. And you remember the cover there was Planet Earth, and there was a black planet that was preparing to eclipse planet Earth, right? And the whole masterpiece, the whole record was about how America would become a majority Black, a majority people of color nation. The demographics it was like an incredible foreshadowing of where the country would go. And it talked about the corresponding fear that would attach to those changing demographics. And we're here, right? We're in that moment they thought about 30 years ago, where the country is not only browning, but will soon be a majority people of color country. It's happening in states across the country. New Jersey is 48% people of color. And so I think to Monifa's point about power, I think the resistance that we are experiencing is a result of the fear that folks have, recognizing the power that we have. And so I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the movements we've seen, the advances we've seen. Monifa and I, our first work together was, we went to Alabama. Remember this, Monifa? We went to Alabama. We were trying to get Alabama to restore the right to vote to people with criminal convictions. That was like 15 years ago or something like that. And that's an issue that we've seen take root across the country. Here in New Jersey, we launched a campaign, we called the campaign 1844 No More, Let Us Vote. And the reason 1844 matters is because in that year in New Jersey, the state did two things. It restricted the right to vote to white men only, and it disqualified people with criminal convictions from voting in 1844. So we launched this campaign, and we built a lot on both the expansion and efforts to scale back democracy nationally. And we said, why not begin to make New Jersey a beacon for democracy? And we were able, with partners, to get a bill passed that restored the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole. And that work was made possible by the moments that we have experienced. So I do think that we're in one of those moments. I also think that moments don't make themselves, really to Monifa's point, and windows close. And I do think that you do get a sense that people are wanting to move past race, right? You get a sense that folks, are hesitant to talk about Blackness in the way they were 2 years ago. And I think that's on us to keep that conversation front and center and to continue to push as hard as we have been in this moment.
So, Ryan, I'm going to stick with you. First of all, shout out to Chuck D, Prophet, Flav. But I'm going to stick with you for this next question first, and we'll work our way back around. We're at a law school. I suspect we have a number of law students on the line as well. So I want to talk a little bit about litigation and the role of litigation in all of this. As someone who has done a ton of impact litigation around the country in various forms, as have I, and really invested a lot of time and energy in that as a sort of strategy or one tactic that we've used to try to move the ball forward. I'm curious to hear, particularly now that you've moved to the Institute and aren't doing as much litigation as you used to what extent do you think litigation has been effective up to this point in getting us to where we want to be? And what are the limitations?
Mhm.
And to what extent do lawyers and law students need to be prepared to forego litigation potentially, and engage in other kinds of advocacy that might be more effective?
Yeah, love the question. And I love the reference to law students. I mean, I lifted that slide up at the top about being 20 years now as a lawyer, because 20 years later, I still have many of the relationships I had when I was an intern. I lifted up as really an important note about maintaining, cultivating, and feeding relationships. So in law school, you have a Deborah Archer, you have a Vincent Sutherland, you have a Jason Williamson. I encourage law students to build those relationships and maintain those relationships over time, because this community, this racial justice community, is a small community, and these relationships, they endure. So it's important to feed those, to build those. But to your question about litigation, look, I love litigation at LDF. I really enjoy, Monifa would say, I like the contentious nature of litigation. I really enjoy being in court on behalf of clients. I loved arguing. I loved the whole process of litigation. But I came to learn that litigation, it really ought to be part of a broader strategy. And that the way we've used litigation here at the Institute for Social Justice is litigation is sort of a last resort in the toolbox. So our theory of change really begins with community organizing, to understand directly from the communities that we work with what the challenges are, so directly. Then in-house, we do research and writing to understand from a data-driven perspective what those challenges are. And we take both what we've heard directly from communities that we work with and what we've learned in-house to advocate. And the advocacy can be policy advocacy, it can be legislative advocacy. And then when those tools aren't working or can be supplemented by something else, then we litigate. But one of the challenges with litigation, as you know, Jason, is that it takes a very long time. It can take a year to build and file a case, and it can take a decade to litigate a case. So when Jason was an intern, for example, one of the cases that we worked on together was a case in Washington State. It was a case that sought to enfranchise people in prison on probation and parole. It was a case filed by people in prison. When we got into the case, it was 5 years old. And we litigated that case for about 5 years, up to the Ninth Circuit, to an en banc panel of the Ninth Circuit after we won before a 3-judge panel. And then that Ninth Circuit en banc panel reversed the case. And we did not appeal to the Supreme Court for all the obvious reasons. And so that was 10 years of litigation on an important issue, which I do think changed the conversation about the issue in Washington State and more broadly, but it was 10 years of litigation. 6 years ago, I came to the Institute and began working with a team of folks across New Jersey to get legislation to achieve the same goal we sought through litigation in Washington State. And we were successful in doing so. Now that we built on work that people had done over many years before I got here, but I think the litigation it's an important tool, but I think it's really best used when it's part of a broader strategy that includes the work around community organizing that Monifa has done, the work around data and research and writing, the work around policy analysis and policy advocacy and legislative advocacy. And then litigation is an important piece of that toolbox. But I think as an initial instinct, the instinct to sue right away, there are some cases where that's required, but very often you can achieve what you seek to achieve through litigation through other means, at least initially.
So I appreciate that, and I'm gonna. It's really a question I want to ask Monifa, but I also want to give you a chance, Ryan, to just think about this a little bit, because I think Monifa is going to come at it from a different angle. But I want to know from all of you, really, to the extent that we think that abolition is a goal, right, in any particular space, whether that be within the criminal legal system, or we're talking about the carceral system, whether we're talking about police, whatever it may be, cancel rent, right? Is that something that is litigation a tool that can help to get us there? Or do we have to find a way to work outside of the litigation box if we want to achieve that kind of extraordinary remedy, for lack of a better term? And so I was going to ask this to Monifa in terms of the work that you've done in partnership with litigators as you've been out there organizing and pulling folks together and doing, what I think is, well, certainly the work that the folks on the ground benefit from more directly. Do you see litigation as a necessary or essential tool alongside that organizing work? Do you see it as does it depend on the circumstance? I'm just curious, what is your thought, given the experiences that you've had in various movements through the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a critical tactic that we can use in a larger strategy, a very important one. But what happens a lot of times is when you get litigators together, they fail to realize the importance of all of the other tactics that a campaign or a coalition is trying to push forward, right? You guys went to school a long time. You've been, Ryan, he want to get in the courtroom. And so when you're getting in these planning meetings, we meet ahead of time because we're like, we're gonna have to drag these lawyers when we get in this meeting, right? So let us prepare our case to go in, because it is a very important tool. It's a critical tactic because we need all the tools in the toolbox, but we also need labor and the tactics that they bring to the table. One of the most powerful sites in the summer of 2020 that we had that actually wasn't coordinated is that when in cities across the country, protesters were being kettled and arrested, it was in such huge numbers, they couldn't fit in police cars and paddy wagons. So they had commandeered city buses in New York, and in Minneapolis and in Oakland. And the Transit Workers Union huddled up, and they had the bus drivers refuse to drive the buses to take the folks from downtown Brooklyn to Barclay to central booking. That was powerful. That was a powerful tactic that labor, they figured out what role they were going to play. The litigators need to figure out what role they're going to play. The policy writers need to figure out their role. The comms experts have to figure out their role. And everyone has to come to it and know that the larger goal is building power. So your legal win can't be the goal of the campaign, even if we say it is in the press. Like, you have to know, and you have to be in coalition with folks in the communities that you're fighting for to know what the real goals are. And so the example I wanted to use was the Floyd case that we organized and won back in 2013, which was around stop and frisk. We totally changed the conversation around stop, question, and frisk, not just in New York City because of this campaign, but across the country. But it wasn't just a lawsuit. We had bills in city council. We were doing mobilizations in the streets every day. We had a citywide cop watch patrol going, and we were collecting video footage of stop and frisk and showing that. So there was a comm strategy. So we were really creating a conversation. And sometimes it was hard. I'm glad there's a lot of law students on the panel. Sometimes it's hard not to see yourself as the starring role in something when in the press, it's saying, well, it's the Floyd case and it's the Floyd case and it's the Floyd case. And if you're the lawyer for the Floyd case, then you're like, I'm the leading man, I'm the leading lady, right? When in actuality, it's a smoke and mirrors. We're trying to build power for communities of folks who get stopped and frisked every day. And there's a history behind it. So the Floyd litigation was actually part 2 because we launched litigation in 2003 called Daniels versus New York City against the street crimes unit in the wake of the killing of Amadou Diallo. Like, that's how many of us were baptized in New York City around the current work that we're doing. So this goes back to 1999, right? And when we had a coalition called People's Justice 2000, we said we need laws, we need to file some lawsuits, we need to pass some bills. A year later, 9/11 happens. And so a package of bills that were conceived of in 2000 called the Amadou Diallo Package Act was a non-conversation in 2001, right? Because the conversation had shifted. So we knew that the most important piece always had to be the narrative power, the comms power. How can we talk about our issues no matter what else is happening, in the ether? It's like, how can we keep our stuff center stage to what's happening. And so fast forward 10 years later, the Daniels 2003 litigation resulted in the data collection that we needed to show that stop and frisk was actually racial profile. I mean, we've been doing cop watch. We knew that was happening. When our cop watch patrols would get arrested, we would hit up those litigators that were the Daniels lawyers to come and assist us at those times. But there has to be an ecosystem where everyone understands their role and that there's a larger goal about what are we leaving behind that builds power. And I think this really ties to the abolition question. I wanted to name that, Jason, because, I think back about how proud of themselves Congress must have been, back in the 1800s when they banned the actual transporting of Africans to the United States, right? So we're not going to abolish slavery. We're going to reform the system, right? And we're going to make it illegal to transport folks across the Atlantic Ocean, right? So we had this big win. We ended the mid-Atlantic slave trade. But when you work on things like that, and it's not informed by everyone we named, right? The researchers, the economists, the people who are actually enslaved, you don't know what the impact will be on the ground. And so coming off of winning that very important piece of legislation that we learn about in history, you enter into the most dangerous, harrowing, and just awful time in slavery, right? Because the price on Black folks' heads went through the roof, right? 10 times more expensive, 20 times more expensive. People who lived in states that didn't have slavery would be regularly being kidnapped. That's what 12 Years a Slave is about, right? And you had the growth of breeding farms went through the roof because now our worth economically went through the roof, and it made for, child theft, separation of families, all of these things. And it was a horrible time. And these were the types of harms that we just point to when we say, when reform doesn't go far enough, a lot of times you end up doing further harm to the communities that you're trying to help, right? So you put a Band-Aid on something, but there's so much internal bleeding that we're going to have to move to something that's even greater, bloodshed sooner. So, I always like to offer that example and say that the tactic of litigation is an important tool, but it sits really parallel alongside all of these pieces, and they all have to be wrapped up in an organizing, building power strategy that has a very clear goal of abolition. It's okay to win laws in states that aren't abolition on their face, students. Like, that's totally fine. As long as you're not doing things that help to codify, further entrench carceral systems, as long as those reforms are eating away at, and you have that larger goal in mind, and it's not going to be the end all to be all to say that, well, we've solved that issue because we've passed this reform, because we know we have so much further to go.
Incredible insight, Monifa. I appreciate that. But I feel like we could stay on this for the next hour if we wanted to. But I wanted to come to April with this because I'm curious, in your mind, how litigation, or what the implications of litigation are in the context of individual representation. You talked about the Black Public Defender Association, and I wonder how you can encourage those folks to be a part of this movement, or whether you can encourage those folks to, through their litigation, through their representation of individual clients, to try to make some headway here with respect to racial justice more generally, understanding that none of these clients signed up to be activists. They're trying to get their case resolved, right? They're trying to get out of jail. And so is it even appropriate for a public defender, Black or not, to infuse, their own sort of activism or politics into their representation in an effort to make some larger change, when really, at least it could be argued that your job as a lawyer is to do what your client is asking you to do, and that should be your focus. So can you talk a little bit about how this plays out in the NLADA context?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Jason, I think your question really goes at the heart of like what it means to be a defender or to do the work on a daily basis, and specifically for Black defenders that's committed to abolition, committed to liberation of Black communities. What does it mean to do the work? So, it was something we had to struggle with at BPDA when we were created, about whether or not we're an abolitionist organization. And we were very clear about the fact that we are trying to work ourselves out of a job. So yes, we are working daily within carceral systems to stop suffering, to minimize the harm that is done to many communities of color. However, we also want to be in partnership with the community to talk about what it means to build new systems, right? And to completely dismantle the systems that we know are not able to be reformed, right? So I think it's a daily struggle that many people who work directly within the systems, whether you're in the family regulation system every day, whether you're in the criminal legal system, whether or not whatever system you're working within, you are trying to minimize harm, but at the same time, be in community to figure out how do we build new systems. And so one thing that we decided to focus on at BPDA is Black defender leadership training, because so many people leave the work because they can't figure out, how do I work within these systems and hold space for building new systems in partnership with my community. And so we think it's so important for especially students that's considering going into this work, for you to fully understand what was said about you have to work in partnership with community. It's not your decision about what it means, and what role do you play in transferring resources and power back to community for them to decide what the solutions are, and how can we be used as a tool, not just the attorneys, but the social workers, the investigators, everybody who work to support people when they're facing these systems. How can we use our role to further empower and transfer resources back to the communities that we serve? And, actually, Jason, I think maybe we met at a community-oriented defender network conference, and that's something that started at NYU and now is at NLADA, but just really training people about what does it mean to be a community-oriented lawyer. Some people say movement lawyering. What does that really mean? And that's the type of training that we are trying to embed in, I call them baby defenders and baby civil legal aid attorneys, when they start the work, where you don't unintentionally do more harm. What Monifa was talking about you may think it's a win, but you don't really fully understand the unintentional harm that you may be further perpetuating on the communities that you serve when you are not centered in community. And so that's a key role that we play at NLADA in trying to train those who serve every day in the individual cases. What does it mean to be community-driven, community-oriented?
Thank you so much, April. I want to ask you a related question, because I struggle with this, and I don't know if Monifa or Ryan, you want to weigh on this as well, but is it your view that as lawyers, we should be able to get out of the way when litigation is not sort of the primary tactic that the group has decided on, get in the way and let other folks lead? Or should we as lawyers be prepared to do other things aside from litigate cases, including helping to organize folks and have conversations and talk and sort of be in community with people, but recognizing that organizing is not something that you just wake up and know how to do, and that there are people who know how to do it in a way that is effective. So how do you balance kind of, being flexible in your role as a lawyer, and I'm talking specifically as a Black attorney as well, with wanting to be respectful of the roles that other folks are prepared to play and are probably better at playing than you are as someone who's got some legal training?
I went to Howard and was trained in this concept of social engineering, right? And it was all about how it's almost like you an engineer, and the law degree is one tool that you have in the toolbox that you can help to improve the conditions of communities, specifically the communities that you're from. But I just think it's so important, and it's, contrary to what is trained in law school around elitism and kind of legal training. I think we have to own and be honest, specifically with the majority of people who work on behalf of people that's impacted by the systems are not Black. And so what does it mean for them to reckon with this notion of like legal training that's indoctrinated in white supremacy and hierarchy, and to then go serve communities that don't look like them? And so I think it forces you, first of all, to sit back and understand that you don't know, and that you should sit back and let the community tell you when you can be used as a tool, but not for you to go in and assume that you are here to save somebody or you're the expert. But to be honest with you, that's a lot of training that you have to undo with recent law school graduates or people who may have really good intentions. So I think it's a cultural issue that our legal training is very much rooted in white supremacy, and what it means to be in partnership with Black communities means that they have to unlearn a lot of those, a lot of the culture that's taught in law school.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's part of where my question comes from, because a lot of law students respond to these sorts of conversations with kind of either frustration or a lack of clarity for what does that mean for me? Like, should I still plan to go out and be a litigator and try to do all the things that I was planning to do, or does my career now look completely different because you're telling me litigation needs to be paired with these other things? So I appreciate that. And if anybody else has any other thoughts on that, I'd love to hear. Ryan?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I love what April shared. I think what law school prepares you to do is to advocate. I think it gives you the skills to think critically, to sharply reason, to research and write, and to use your voice. And I think the beautiful thing about a law degree is it shows you that you can advocate in any number of ways. But I have seen very few lawyers who are great organizers, right? So I'm really blessed to have met Monifa early in my career. What I learned from that experience is there are things, to April's point, that I do well. I think advocacy is something I do well, but if I'm going to make the advocacy meaningful, it's got to be connected to a broader strategy that's rooted in community. And there you need people who have the expertise to do community organizing. And so I think that's what law school doesn't teach you, is it doesn't teach you how you make your work real on the ground. It also doesn't really teach you how to work well with other people. And I do think one of the challenges of law school is it doesn't teach you humility. I think one of the lessons I learned in the work I did at LDF was, I can learn, and anyone can learn from anyone. Like, there are lessons to be learned, lifelong lessons to be learned from everyone without regard to whatever position they hold in life. It just requires a posture of listening and of humility. So I do think, to your question earlier, Jason, about litigation, it's a critical piece of the advocacy toolbox, but it's best used, I think, when connected to a broader strategy. So on the subject of abolition, I lifted up as my last slide the fact that in New Jersey, a Black child is 18 times more likely to be imprisoned than a white child. That's by design. In New Jersey, just 2 years after the Civil War ended, New Jersey opened its first youth prison for boys. At that time, it was housed primarily by newly freed Black kids and immigrants. And 154 years later, there are very few white kids in prison. The overwhelming majority of kids in prison are Black by design. And so, there are a couple of questions. And so as a law student lawyer, how do you address that issue? And we launched a campaign at that time called 150 Years is Enough, hearkening back to the opening of the youth prison. And the goal was to close New Jersey's youth prisons. There are 3, and to reinvest those resources into communities most impacted by youth incarceration. And there wasn't a clear litigation strategy available, but there was an organizing strategy and there was a legislative strategy. And in this earlier question, Jason, in this moment, which folks have thought about as a reckoning, we used it to push really, really hard on the reinvestment strategy. So we got a bill passed that invested almost $10 million of New Jersey's youth prison budget into the 4 cities most impacted by youth incarceration. That was through straight community organizing and legislative and other advocacy. There wasn't a litigation strategy there. And certainly we had a good number of lawyers, but the lawyers didn't drive that campaign. But I think the value of having gone to law school allowed us to do the critical research and writing, to know the numbers, to understand the history. And that became sort of the basis for understanding why we had to say 150 years is enough. Certainly a long, long way to go toward abolition, but those are critical steps in that direction.
Monifa?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on it too, because I think absolutely everyone can be a community organizer, because community is amorphous. And so, I go back to what I said about the bus drivers, right? And the transit workers union. So by trade, these are transit workers who are experts in getting working people to and from where they got to go, but they also have a union, right? So they are organized, they have organizers, and the people who are doing that organizing are also people who work in the transit field, right? And so they were able to have a huge impact on this fight for racial justice in the moment and the larger discussion around abolition, because they organized. And so when you were reading April's bio earlier, everything in there to me describes April as an organizer, right? The community that she's organizing are lawyers, are Black lawyers, which is very important, right? So we have to kind of, we have to really expand our creativity when we think about community, and we think about the different groupings of folks that need to be mobilized for us to get to where we have to go. Because what we're faced with is not just the players that exist within the criminal legal system, right? It's not only the criminal legal system that is, exacting white supremacy on our communities, right? It's the medical system, it's the transit system, it's the education system, right? And so just like there's players in all those systems that we're trying to dismantle and make better for our communities, we also have to have players that are experts in those different systems, that are part of those communities, right? We need Black doctors, we need Black nurses, we need Black midwives, we need folks that come from this abolitionist center to go into those spaces. Social workers, teachers, like anybody can function in a carceral way, right? And as Black people who have specialties, like I think hubris is a part of how we're able to get to where we are in our specialty, right? April talked about Howard. I went to Spelman. It's like that was almost as important as the skills that you were learning. This is how you go into a room and take over that room, right? So you're dealing with Black folks that are like, I've specialized in this. I have some hubris on this, and so we have to hold it for the right space. When we're building campaigns and we're building an organizing strategy, that's when we really take a back seat to whoever is most impacted by that issue that we're meeting around. Whether it's victims of state violence, whether it's Black moms that have bad experiences in hospitals, like whatever it is, you have to take second chair to folks that is hitting home. You have to understand what it looks like, what it smells like, what is a real solution and what is a Band-Aid solution. And that takes folks who are most impacted being in the driver's seat. So it's not so much, and a lot of times those folks aren't organizers, right? If your child is killed by the police, that doesn't like automatically make you an organizer, but you know what it was like and how different it was for the DA to treat you than if your son was killed by someone else in the community versus now how they were killed by the police. You have that firsthand experience and you know what the solutions are that would help make you healthy and whole, right? So anyway, I just say that, yes, is my answer to your question, Jason. I think that there is a particular training around how you build campaigns, how you project manage, how you identify goals, how you line up all these tactics together in a strategy, right? But that really everyone in their different area, their environment, you know, even if they're an educator, they can be an organizer. I believe that Ryan's wife, Charity, is an organizer, right? Gets educators together to push back on the system as educators, because educators need to do that because they know what's actually wrong there. And as litigators, y'all know intimately what is wrong with the criminal legal system, right? Right alongside the impacted folks. I really think it is a togetherness.
And Jason, I know we're going to Q&A, but I just second what she said about community. For Black people, the way we have survived this experience is in community. And so community, when you have a shared experience, and one thing around us creating BPDA was that community also needs a place of solace, right? Because it's something about that collective experience that when you get together, nobody else can quite understand it, right? And so one thing I would say to students, specifically students who will commit their life to this work, it's so important for you to do it in partnership with community. Ryan and that beautiful list that he had, you know, I think many of us who have committed our careers, we have a similar list, right? And just how important those people have lifted us in times where the work is hard. I want to be very clear that we have, it's a heaviness sometimes to continue in the work, and community is what keeps you going. And even when you can't keep going, it's somebody else in that community who will continue going. So I just want to lift up community because it is just so critically important to us being able to not survive, but also thrive in the face of a lot of adversity.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. And I want to give all of you a chance to kind of close us out on that. I see we only have one question in the Q&A right now. So before I move to my last question, which I think will lead us into our closeout here, let me just, since we're talking about litigation and sort of the law generally, the question is, do other non-litigation approaches, and I'm assuming this person is referring to legal tactics, right? Things that you can do within the law, they name mediation, arbitration, facilitation. Do any of these other kind of alternative forms of advocacy for lawyers work, or any of those? Have any of you found those effective when it comes to fighting for racial justice?
Yeah, I'll start because I know that April and Ryan probably has done this. I would also say a lot of the policy work, right? Drafting the bills for us, working with organizers and people from different backgrounds to create the policies, to create those North Star policies that we know will actually change things. It's hard a lot of times to find policy shops that are willing to work with organizers. And sometimes it's just a group of lawyers will get together and help you bang it out. One of the things that we launched back in 2020 was we wrote a piece of federal legislation called the Breathe Act, right? We said, how do we, when we say invest, divest, we have a policy platform with all of these like, you know, very poetic declarations. What does that actually look like in a federal bill? And we're able to get Law for Black Lives and law students and SC Justice Group out in California and some other folks. And we were meeting like every morning, nonstop, putting together all the components and the language that goes into a piece of federal legislation. It was an omnibus bill. But then what happened, you know, because of the amazing work that was happening on the ground, especially electoral work, we got movement folks in Congress, right? And Cori Bush introduced Section 2 of the Breathe Act, which was written by organizers in the summer of 2020, right? That says the People's Response Act is saying that we will resource up the Department of Health and Human Services to distribute grants to states to invest in non-carceral, non-punitive interventions around community violence. This is what we've been asking for. So writing that out, we needed lawyers, for that. So yes, it's not just the, being a litigator, although we love the litigators. But there are, yes, all kinds of things that you can do, in my opinion.
Anybody want to add anything to that? April or Ryan?
I would just lift up, first of all, it's been an honor to share space with you all today, so I'm very grateful. The second thing, I would just say restorative justice has been transformative, specifically with youth, and also participatory defense, like literally building hubs in community to work alongside public defenders to actually impact the outcomes of cases. So those are just two models that I would lift up.
I would just lift up Monifa's point about legislation. One of the things we've tried to do here at the Institute is to help communities interact directly with their legislative officials and to hold them accountable. So it's not just lawyers or legislators who can influence legislation that gets introduced. Communities can champion legislation and they can fight for it and see it get passed. They can also testify in support of it. So we tried to work with communities to empower them with the sense that they can drive the kind of legislation that gets both introduced and ultimately passed and then implemented in ways that benefit their communities.
Thank you for that. So I'm thinking that we have about a little under 10 minutes left. I see there's one more question. How can people watch and support the Institute's reparations campaign? So I guess that's directed to you, Ryan.
Yeah, so we launched a campaign called Say the Word Reparations two years ago. We were in 2019, Nicole Hannah-Jones came to speak here in Newark, and after she left, we went to Trenton with nearly every Black elected official in the state to introduce a bill that would create a New Jersey Reparations Commission, similar to the federal legislation. And the legislation would do two things. One, it would finally take responsibility for New Jersey's role in slavery. Ours was a colony founded upon slavery. New Jersey, as a colony, gave each English white settling family 150 acres of land. And it gave those same families an additional 150 acres of land for each enslaved African that worked on that land. That's how New Jersey's modern day racial wealth gap was created. It was conceived of, it was birthed in slavery. So this task force would take responsibility for that. And it would also take responsibility for the enduring harm that followed slavery, sharecropping, restrictive covenants, redlining, predatory lending practices, and more. The second thing the task force would do is it would make recommendations around the kind of policies, practices, systems, financial and other investments to be made to repair the enduring harm. And at the time the bill was introduced, there wasn't a state that had a commission like this, although they had been talked about for some time. And so it was in one of our meetings with the legislator, his name is Craig Coughlin, who leads the assembly, who said, look, Ryan, I would support this commission if you just called it something else. You would call it a racial equity task force, a racial wealth gap, a Black Lives Matter task force. But the word, Ryan, the word reparations, it just unsettles, like Monifa, just unsettles people, it makes them uncomfortable. So if you would just change the name, then I'd support it today and it would get passed. And I said to him, along with our other allies in the room, the fact that we're asking you for a task force, we actually know how we could repair the harm right now. But that we're asking you for a task force is the concession. And so at a minimum, recognizing the concession, we just got to be clear about what this commission will do. So we then launched a campaign inspired by our conversation by Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin called Say the Word Reparations. And we've had support from thousands of folks across New Jersey, as I mentioned, every Black elected official and others, but the bill, it hasn't had a hearing yet. And so just yesterday, the Newark City Council passed a resolution encouraging the legislature to pass the bill. We're going to move to different cities and get resolutions that way to really build power from the ground. to encourage the legislature to pass the bill. So folks who are interested can go to 400yearsnj.org, 400yearsnj.org to join the Say the Word Reparations campaign. To Monifa's point, last thing I'll say is on this year was the first year that New Jersey celebrated Juneteenth as a state holiday, right? And it does speak to your earlier point, Jason, about the moment. We have seen, I think, some powerful advocacy, but we've also seen a whole lot of symbolism. I'm not diminishing the importance of symbolism, but we've seen streets get renamed, Black Lives Matter, Lane, Street, Circle, Block. We've seen Christopher Columbus come out of some parks. We've seen the Confederate flag come out of Mississippi State flag. All those are important acts of symbolism. But here in New Jersey, when we celebrate Juneteenth as a holiday, I think we did so prematurely because we celebrated freedom in New Jersey without really unpacking the underlying system of slavery and its enduring consequence. And so New Jersey historically was actually a state that rejected the Emancipation Proclamation. So my push here in New Jersey was, before we celebrate Juneteenth as a holiday, let us go back to the point we rejected the Emancipation Proclamation, do the hard work before we get to the ceremony. But it was on that day that we launched the Say the Word Reparations campaign. And though we won't be the first state to pass this bill, because California has since done that, I do believe this bill will pass and will become the second state.
Thanks so much for that, Ryan. Thank you for the question. We only have a few minutes left. I want to give each of you a minute or so. And Brian, you started to go down this road, so you're welcome to pick it back up if you want. But, we talked a lot about from whence we came and all of the many obstacles and things that are in our way. We talked a lot about community and the importance of staying engaged with community members and impacted folks. We talked about combining all sorts of different tactics and strategies to try to get us from A to B. And it all still feels very daunting. So I wanted to give everybody a minute to just tell us why should we be hopeful? Why should the folks who joined this call thinking that they wanted to go into this work still maintain that path and go and do this work? What do we have to look forward to going forward? And what keeps you going as you engage in this work? April, you want to start us off?
So let me jump in and just say what makes me hopeful is the new generation. I think in every generation we have a role to play. But my 6 and 8-year-old daughters who are being taught principles of abolition in elementary school and what it means to build new systems, I know from having conversations with them that there will be a new world to exist, because this next generation, they are committed to really unpacking and tearing down things that no longer serve them. So whether or not you see that in people refusing to work for non-living wages, whether you see it in a new movement around what it means for human rights for everyone, I'm confident that I'm just holding a torch to pass along to students that's joining us today and people like my children who will reimagine in a way that perhaps it wasn't meant for my lifetime, but I know they will build new systems, and that makes me hopeful.
Thanks, April. Monifah?
So I'm really hopeful. I challenge folks to do some forensics, actually. If you go back to 2015, Black Lives Matter was a slogan that everyone hated. The news reports, the headlines, even in meetings, people were like, it's terrible. Can't you say all lives matter? Can't you say Black Lives Matter too? Fast forward to 2016, just saying the word is where they tried to lay the blame of the results of the 2016 election, right? Because you called it that. You shouldn't call it that, right? Now you fast forward to now, and there's no city in the United States where Black people live, at least, where some plaza hasn't been renamed Black Lives Matter, right? So, they are literally, as my daughters would say, playing in our faces with this issue that it matters what it's called, right? And that people can move forward with something as long as you are able to build enough power so that they either have to or want to, right? And I'm just very hopeful because I can see through it. I think that when we're in the moment and we're watching a 24-hour news cycle and it can just seem like, oh man, critical race theory, it's going to cause us to lose the midterms and all of these things. And it can be very daunting, but we really have to understand they are playing in our faces. We are actually winning. We're gaining ground, huge, by leaps and bounds. And that's why this fear is coming down so hard, even to the point to pretend that we're not even gaining the ground that we're gaining. My daughters are older, they're in their late teens and early 20s. And I agree with everything that April said. I mean, they check me. They're like, no, that's not politically correct, or that's not far enough, that's not North Star far enough. So they are ready to create a new world. We've helped lay that foundation, our parents have. And so I just hope that everyone listening to the panel today goes into their career with that in mind. We don't have to work within the limitations of what exists, right? We have the creativity and the ability to create something new, that has been done and that is being done. So that is why I'm hopeful. And, I just hope we have more conversations like this across the board.
I love that. Thank you so much, Monifa. Ryan, you want to close us out?
Sure. To Monifa's last point, I thank the center for hosting this conversation. It's, we're having a Zoom conversation for a reason, right? And that's because we're emerging from an international public health crisis that claimed the lives of more than 800,000 people and changed every aspect of the way that we live. And if nothing else, it reminded us about how precious this life is and how precious the time we have here on earth is. And for me, it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this kind of work. And so to the question, I think I encourage folks to embrace it. So whatever the passion is for whatever issue, lean into it, because I think that the passion you have for the issue that you care about is a gift, and do it because it matters. I think we've seen that when people speak up and when they're well organized, they change things, and they always have. And it's always been a small group of people. Like I have the picture of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the Bloody Sunday March, and there are just 600 people marching over the bridge. And they changed the course of America, 600 people. It was not the case that the majority of people, even in the state or in that city, were on the bridge with them, but they had a vision for a moment beyond the one that they were in. And they organized themselves in a push to realize it for us, like the generations that would follow. So I'm so inspired by that and feel thankful to be a part of it for as long as I'm here.
Well, it has been my honor and privilege to be with all of you tonight. I really am grateful for all of your thoughts and your time and your willingness to share. And to Monifa's point, this hopefully will be the start of more conversation and engagement with more and more folks around all of this. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm hopeful as well for all the reasons that you guys have laid out. So thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we'll hopefully come back together again soon. All right. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great night.